Daniel rubbed his temples as he drove home, the headache pounding behind his eyes like a drum. It was only 2 in the afternoon, but there was no way he could stare at his computer screen for another minute. His startup office had been buzzing, with activity. Phones ringing, people talking, keyboards clicking. It all became too much. He just needed quiet and darkness. Pulling into his driveway, Daniel noticed the small blue sedan still parked outside. Tuesday. Of course, it was Tuesday. That meant Maria would be here, finishing up the weekly cleaning. He sighed, hoping she'd be done soon so he could collapse on his couch in peace. He unlocked the front door as quietly as possible, not wanting to startle her or get pulled into small talk. The downstairs was spotless as usual, vacuum lines still, fresh in the carpet, the smell of lemon cleaner hanging in the air. Maria was good at her job. He had to give her that. In the 6 months since he'd hired her through the neighborhood app, she'd never missed a day or done anything less than thorough work. Daniel kicked off his shoes and headed upstairs, already imagining the cool darkness of his bedroom. But as he reached the landing, he heard something that made him stop cold. The sound of typing. Fast typing. Coming from his office. His heart rate picked up. His office door was usually closed when Maria cleaned. He kept it that way specifically, so she wouldn't have to navigate around all his equipment and paperwork. The typing continued, a steady rhythm of keys being struck with confidence, not the hesitant pecking of someone unfamiliar with keyboards. Daniel moved slowly down the hallway, his headache momentarily forgotten. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. Was someone stealing his data? His startup had proprietary code worth potentially millions if they secured the funding they were chasing. Industrial espionage wasn't common, but it happened. Maybe Maria wasn't who she said she was. Maybe this had all been an elaborate setup. He reached the door, which stood slightly ajar, and peered through the gap. What he saw stopped him completely. There sat Maria, her back to the door, hunched over his keyboard with an intensity he'd never seen in her before. Her cleaning supplies sat forgotten in the corner. On his screen, lines and lines of code scrolled past. Not random gibberish, but actual programming code with proper syntax and structure. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced ease, never hesitating, like someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Next to his keyboard sat a worn spiral notebook, its cover held together with strips of tape. Maria would occasionally glance at it, then back to the screen, muttering under her breath. Daniel could catch snippets of Spanish mixed with English technical terms. No, that function needs to return the array. If statement here, loop through the data. This wasn't someone trying to steal information. This was someone actively writing code. Daniel stood frozen for what felt like minutes, but was probably only 30 seconds. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Maria, who he'd only ever interacted with briefly during payment exchanges and the occasional, "Everything looks great, thank you," was a programmer. Or at least, she knew how to code. What was she doing on his computer? Why hadn't she asked permission? The anger started to bubble up. This was a violation of privacy, of trust. He'd let this woman into his home and she was using his equipment without permission. But something held him back from immediately confronting her. Maybe it was the complete absorption on her face, the way she leaned forward like nothing else in the world existed except the problem she was solving. He recognized that look. He'd worn it himself countless times. Daniel cleared his throat. Maria jumped so violently that her knee hit the underside of the desk. The water bottle she'd placed beside the keyboard toppled over, water spreading across the wooden surface. She spun around, her face going from concentrated to absolutely terrified in half a second. "Mr. Daniel, I didn't. You're not supposed to." Her words tumbled out in panicked English, her accent thicker than he'd ever heard it. She grabbed the water bottle with shaking hands, trying to stop the spill with her sleeve, her eyes darting between him and the door like a trapped animal looking for escape. "I'm so sorry," she continued, her voice breaking. "Please, I can explain. Please don't call anyone. I never touched your files, I swear. I only used my own programs. Please, Mr. Daniel, I have a daughter. I need this job. Please." Tears started forming in her eyes, and Daniel felt his anger deflating like a punctured tire. Whatever he'd expected, it wasn't this level of genuine fear. Maria was grabbing paper towels from her cleaning caddy now, frantically mopping up the water, apologizing over and over in a mix of Spanish and English. "Maria, stop," Daniel said, holding up his hands. "Just stop for a second." She froze, clutching the wet paper towels, looking at him with the expression of someone waiting for a judge to announce their sentence. The code on his screen was still visible, and despite the bizarre situation, Daniel found his eyes drawn to it. It was JavaScript, he realized. Not just any JavaScript either, but React code. Modern framework stuff. This wasn't beginner programming. The question came out before he'd fully formed it in his mind. "What were you working on?" Maria blinked at him, clearly not expecting that question. "What?" "The code." Daniel gestured at the screen. "What were you building?" She stood there, frozen in confusion. This wasn't how she thought this conversation would go. Daniel could see it on her face. She'd expected yelling, accusations, maybe threats. Not curiosity. She started, then stopped. Looked at the screen. Looked back at him. "You're not angry?" "I didn't say that," Daniel replied, moving into the room but keeping his distance so he wouldn't spook her further. "I'm definitely confused, and yeah, using someone's computer without permission isn't okay. But I'm more interested in understanding what's going on here before I decide anything else." He pulled out the chair from the corner of the room and sat down, trying to make himself less imposing. His headache was still there, throbbing away, but his curiosity was stronger now. "So," he said, keeping his voice level, "you clearly know how to code. That's React on my screen, which means you know modern JavaScript frameworks. That notebook next to you looks like it's been through a war. You're working on something, and you've been using my computer to do it. I'm going to take a wild guess that there's a story here. Want to tell me what it is?" Maria stood there for a long moment, the wet paper towel still in her hands, clearly trying to decide if this was some kind of trap. Finally, slowly, she set the paper towels down on the desk and took a shaky breath. "In my country," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "before I came here, I was not always a cleaner." Daniel leaned forward slightly, and Maria began to tell him a story that would change everything he thought he knew about the quiet woman who cleaned his house every Tuesday. Maria's hands were still trembling as she stood there, trying to find the right words. Daniel could see her weighing every sentence in her mind before speaking, like someone walking through a minefield. "I'm from Venezuela," she finally said, her voice steadier now but still cautious. "Caracas. You know what is happening there, yes? The economy, the crisis?" Daniel nodded. He'd seen the news reports, though he admitted to himself that he'd never paid much attention beyond the headlines. "I studied computer science at Universidad Central," Maria continued, and there was a flash of something in her eyes. Pride, maybe. Or the memory of pride. "I was in my 4th year. Top grades in my class. I loved it, you know? Solving problems, building things with code. My professors said I had talent, that I could work anywhere when I graduated." She pulled out the chair and sat down heavily, like the weight of the story was too much to tell standing up. But things got bad. Really bad. My mother, she has diabetes. The medicine disappeared from pharmacies. No insulin anywhere. People were dying for things that should be simple to get. My daughter, Sophia, she was 8 years old, and I watched her lose weight because there wasn't enough food. We had money. I had a part-time job at a tech company, but money meant nothing when the shelves were empty. Daniel listened quietly. This wasn't what he'd expected at all. My cousin, he lived here in the States for 5 years. He said, "Come, bring Mama and Sophia. We'll figure it out." So we left. We left everything. My university degree, my job, my life. We took 2 suitcases and whatever we could carry. Maria's eyes drifted to the computer screen, to the code still displayed there. That was 3 years ago. 3 years, Mr. Daniel. You know what I learned very fast? My degree from Venezuela, it means nothing here. Nothing. To get it recognized, I need money for translations, for evaluations. for certificates. Thousands of dollars I don't have. And even then, maybe it counts. Maybe it doesn't. Companies want American degrees, American experience. She laughed, but it was a bitter sound. So I clean houses. I clean toilets for people who have more education than me, less education than me. It doesn't matter. Because I need money for rent, for Mama's insulin, for Sophia's school supplies. My cousin, he tried to help, but he has his own family. I can't be a burden. Daniel felt something uncomfortable settling in his chest. Guilt, maybe, or shame. How many times had he complained about not finding good developers while Maria had been scrubbing his bathroom floors? But you kept coding, he said, gesturing to the screen. Of course. For the first time, Maria smiled a real smile. You don't stop being who you are just because your circumstances change. At night, after Sophia sleeps, after Mama takes her medicine, I go to the library. They have computers, free internet. I teach myself new things. JavaScript, React, Python. All the modern frameworks that didn't exist when I was in university. YouTube videos, free courses, documentation. Whatever I can find. She picked up the worn notebook Daniel had noticed earlier. Up close, he could see it was filled with neat handwriting, diagrams, flowcharts, and code snippets. Every page was covered, front and back. Some pages had coffee stains. Others looked like they'd gotten wet and dried again. This is my real work, Maria said softly. 3 years of learning, planning, building. I'm making an application, a mobile app, for people like me, like Mama. Immigrants who need to navigate the healthcare system, but don't understand how it works here. Everything is so complicated. Insurance, copays, networks, referrals. People miss appointments because they don't understand. They go to emergency rooms for simple things because they don't know they can go somewhere else. It costs them money they don't have. She opened the notebook to a page filled with sketches of mobile phone screens, showing different layouts and buttons. My app, I call it Puente. It means bridge in Spanish. It helps people find clinics, understand their insurance, translate medical terms, even remind them about appointments. Simple things, but things that matter. I built most of it on library computers, but those computers, they're old, slow. Sometimes they crash and I lose work. And there's always a line, always people waiting. I can only use them for 2 hours at a time. Daniel was starting to understand. So you started using mine. Maria looked down, the guilt returning to her face. I know it was wrong, I know. But Mr. Daniel, your computer is so powerful. What takes an hour at the library takes 10 minutes here. And you're never home on Tuesdays until evening. I thought just a little time just to test the code, to fix bugs. I swear I never looked at your files. I never touched anything that wasn't mine. I even used an incognito browser window so it wouldn't save any history. She pulled out her phone, old and cracked, and showed him something. It was her own code repository, synced to her cloud account. See? Everything I work on is here in my own account. I would never steal from you. I needed a better tool. Just for a few hours a week. Daniel ran his hand through his hair, processing everything she'd told him. His headache was still there, but he barely noticed it now. He stood up and walked to his computer, looking at the code on the screen with fresh eyes. It was good code. Clean, well-commented, following best practices. He scrolled through a few functions. Error handling, input validation, responsive design considerations. This wasn't amateur work. How far along is it? He asked. The app? Maybe 70%, Maria said. The main features work. I've been testing it with people from my church. Other immigrants who volunteer to try it. They say it helps. But it needs polish, needs better design, needs to be faster. And I want to add more features. A way to connect people with interpreters. Maybe even telehealth options. Daniel pulled up another window, examining the code structure. You're using React Native. That's smart for a mobile app. Cross-platform. It made sense, Maria said, and he could hear the confidence creeping back into her voice when she talked about technical decisions. Why build twice when you can build once? I don't have time to learn both iOS and Android development separately. He clicked through more files. The project was organized well, with clear folder structures and naming conventions. He opened a component file and read through the code. It needed some optimization, sure, and there were patterns she was using that were a bit outdated, but the foundation was solid. More than solid. It was impressive. You taught yourself all of this? Daniel asked. In 3 years? While working full-time as a cleaner? I sleep less, Maria said simply. 4, maybe 5 hours a night. Sophia thinks I'm always tired because of cleaning. She doesn't know I stay up coding until 2 in the morning. Mama knows, but she worries. She tells me to rest, that I'll make myself sick. But I can't stop, Mr. Daniel. This is who I am. This is what I'm supposed to do. I feel it. Daniel sat back down, his mind racing. Here was someone with real talent, real drive, working herself to exhaustion on library computers and stolen hours on his machine. Meanwhile, his startup was struggling to find qualified developers. They'd interviewed dozens of candidates over the past few months, people with fancy degrees from expensive schools, and half of them couldn't code their way out of a paper bag. An idea was forming in his mind. It was crazy. Probably stupid. His business partner would think he'd lost his mind. But sometimes the craziest ideas were the ones that changed everything. "Maria," he said slowly, "what if I told you I have a proposal?" She looked at him warily, like she wasn't sure she wanted to hear what came next. "What if instead of sneaking around using my computer, I gave you legitimate access to it? Better than that. What if I helped you finish your app, taught you professional development practices, mentored you, and in return, you could help me with my company, learn our systems, our code? We need developers desperately." Maria stared at him like he'd started speaking another language. "I don't understand." "I'm offering you a chance," Daniel said. "Not charity. A real opportunity. You keep your cleaning job if you want it, for the income security. But I add hours for development work, for learning, for building your skills. You finish Puente, and I help you do it right. And maybe if things work out, this turns into something more permanent." Maria's eyes were wide now, filling with tears again. But these were different tears. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this?" Daniel thought about that for a moment. "Because 3 years ago I was sleeping on a friend's couch teaching myself to code, trying to convince people to give me a shot. Someone took a chance on me. Maybe it's time I passed that forward." He extended his hand. "So what do you say? Want to be a developer again?" Maria looked at his hand like it was the most precious thing in the world. Then slowly she reached out and shook it. The first week of the new arrangement was awkward, to say the least. Maria would arrive at 7 in the morning, still dressed in her usual cleaning clothes, and spend the first few hours doing what Daniel paid her for. Vacuuming, dusting, scrubbing bathrooms. But at 10 o'clock sharp, she'd wash her hands, pull out a change of clothes from her bag, and transform into someone different. She'd tie her hair back, put on a clean shirt and jeans, and sit down at Daniel's computer like she belonged there. Daniel had set up a separate user account for her, given her access to development tools and resources, and created a schedule. 3 hours of coding, 3 days a week to start. He'd work alongside her when he could, reviewing her code, suggesting improvements, teaching her the professional practices he'd learned over the years. "You're using too many nested callbacks here," Daniel said on the 3rd day, pointing at her screen. "See how it creates this pyramid shape? We call that callback hell. Let me show you how promises work, and then we'll get into async await. It'll make your code cleaner." Maria absorbed everything like a sponge. She'd take notes in that worn notebook of hers, ask questions, then implement what she learned immediately. Daniel found himself impressed daily by how quickly she picked things up. Concepts that took other developers weeks to grasp, she understood in days. But the biggest surprise came when Daniel showed her his startup's codebase. They were building a platform for small businesses to manage their inventory and sales. The code was a mess in places, cobbled together quickly as they raced to meet investor deadlines. Maria spent an hour just reading through it, saying nothing. Daniel started to worry that maybe he'd overwhelmed her, that professional code at this scale was too much too soon. Then she spoke. "This function here," she said, pointing at a section that had been causing performance issues. "It's running inside the render loop. Every time the component updates, it recalculates everything. That's why it's slow. You should move it outside, use memo to cache the result. Only recalculate when the dependencies actually change." Daniel stared at the code. She was right. Completely right. They'd been struggling with that performance bug for 2 weeks, throwing more and more complicated solutions at it when the answer was actually simple. "How did you catch that so fast?" he asked. Maria shrugged. "When you code on old library computers, you become very aware of performance. Every unnecessary calculation matters. You learn to see waste." That night, Daniel told his business partner, Kevin, about Maria. He left out the part about her being his housekeeper at first. Just said he'd found a talented developer who was looking for opportunities. "Great," Kevin said over the phone. We need all the help we can get. When can she start? What's her rate? Well, she's already started, Daniel admitted. I've been mentoring her for a week. She's the one who solved that render loop problem. There was a pause. Wait, the one that's been killing us? She solved it? In about an hour. Okay, I'm interested. Bring her by the office tomorrow. I want to meet this person. Daniel hesitated. There's something you should know first. The next morning, Daniel and Maria drove to the startup office together. She was quiet in the passenger seat, nervous in a way he hadn't seen since that first day. She'd dressed carefully, in clothes Daniel suspected she'd bought specifically for this meeting. A simple blouse, pressed pants, professional but not expensive. Kevin's going to like you, Daniel assured her. Just be yourself. Show him what you can do. And if he asks about my background, Maria asked quietly, tell him the truth. You studied computer science, you've been learning and building on your own. He doesn't need your entire life story in the first meeting. The office was busy when they arrived, the small team scattered across the open workspace. Kevin looked up from his laptop and waved them over. He was younger than Maria probably expected, only 28, with the kind of casual confidence that came from success. So you're the mystery developer, Kevin said, shaking Maria's hand. Daniel says you're good. Let's see it. For the next hour, Kevin threw coding challenges at Maria. Not the ridiculous brain teasers some companies loved, but real problems from their actual code base. Debug this function. Optimize this query. Explain how you'd architect this feature. Maria handled each one methodically, talking through her reasoning, asking clarifying questions, writing clean code on the whiteboard. Daniel watched Kevin's expression shift from skeptical to interested to genuinely impressed. Okay, Kevin said finally. I'm sold. When can you start full-time? Maria glanced at Daniel. I still have other commitments. Other clients. I can do 20 hours a week right now. Maybe more later. Other clients? Kevin raised an eyebrow. You freelancing? Something like that, Maria said, and Daniel could see her carefully maintaining the truth without revealing everything. They talked numbers. Kevin offered a contract rate that made Maria's eyes widen slightly. It wasn't Silicon Valley money, but it was more than she made in a month of cleaning houses. She'd be able to keep a few of her regular clients for income security, while ramping up her development work. As they left the office, Maria was quiet again. But this time it was a different kind of quiet. Processing, believing. That really just happened, she said when they reached Daniel's car. He offered me real money to write code. You earned it, Daniel replied. You showed him you can do the work. That's all that matters. Over the next month, the arrangement evolved into a rhythm. Maria kept 3 of her cleaning clients, including Daniel, working early mornings 3 days a week. The other 4 days she was at the startup office, gradually being introduced to the team as a new contractor. Nobody questioned it. In tech, people came from all kinds of backgrounds. Well, almost nobody. One afternoon, another developer named Chris asked Maria where she'd worked before. It was an innocent question, just making conversation while they debugged something together. I did some work in Venezuela, Maria said carefully. Then freelance projects when I came here. Cool. Which companies? Maria felt the trap closing. She couldn't name companies because there weren't any, not in the way Chris meant. Mostly small businesses. Nothing you'd know. Chris nodded and went back to the code, but Daniel, overhearing from across the room, saw the uncomfortable moment. This was going to keep happening. Maria's gap in traditional experience would keep coming up. That evening, Daniel approached her as she was packing up. We need to build your portfolio, he said. Real projects with your name on them. Fuente is one, but you need more. Open source contributions. Maybe some freelance work we can document properly. Create a story that doesn't require explaining every detail of the last 3 years. You mean lie? Maria asked. No, I mean frame the truth in a way that makes sense to people who don't need to know everything. You've been developing software. That's not a lie. We just need to show it in a way traditional employers understand. Maria nodded slowly. She was learning that success in this industry wasn't just about coding skill. It was about presentation, networking, fitting into expectations. But then something happened that reminded both of them how fragile this new arrangement really was. Daniel's girlfriend, Rachel, decided to surprise him at home one Saturday afternoon. She'd been traveling for work and came back a day early. She let herself in with the key Daniel had given her months ago, planning to cook him dinner. Instead, she found Daniel and Maria in his office, both staring intently at a laptop screen, Maria's finger pointing at code while Daniel nodded and made notes. They were so focused they didn't hear Rachel come up the stairs. "Daniel?" Rachel's voice made them both jump. "What's going on?" Daniel stood up quickly. "Rachel, you're back early. This is Maria. She's a developer I'm mentoring." "We're working on your housekeeper?" Rachel interrupted, her eyes moving from Maria to Daniel and back. "Your housekeeper is sitting at your computer?" The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. Maria stood up slowly, recognizing the situation for what it was. "I should go," Maria said quietly, reaching for her bag. "No, wait," Daniel started, but Rachel cut him off. "Can I talk to you? Alone?" Maria left quickly, and Daniel could hear her footsteps hurrying down the stairs, the front door closing softly. He turned to face Rachel, already knowing this conversation wasn't going to go well. "How long has this been going on?" Rachel asked, her arms crossed. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it, Daniel? Because from where I'm standing, you've got your cleaning lady sitting in your office on your computer and you two looked pretty comfortable together." "She's a software developer," Daniel said firmly. "A good one. I'm helping her build her career." "That's it. Does she even have a visa? Legal right to work? Or are you just paying your housekeeper under the table to code for you? That's not fair." "What's not fair is you keeping this from me," Rachel shot back. "How long? How long has this been happening?" "About 6 weeks." Rachel laughed, but there was no humor in it. 6 weeks? 6 weeks you've been doing this behind my back. I wasn't hiding it. It just never came up. Because you knew I'd think it was crazy. Because it is crazy, Daniel. You can't just pick up random people and turn them into employees. This is your business we're talking about. What if she steals from you? What if she's not who she says she is? "I trust her," Daniel said simply. "Based on what?" 6 weeks? Based on her work. Based on her drive. Based on the fact that she's been teaching herself advanced programming for 3 years, while working 2 jobs and taking care of her family. Based on the fact that she solved problems my expensive developers couldn't figure out. Rachel stared at him for a long moment. "This is going to end badly. I can feel it. And I can't watch you make this mistake." "It's not a mistake. Then it's a choice," Rachel said quietly. "Her or me. This arrangement ends or we do. I'm not going to compete with your charity project." "That's not fair," Daniel repeated, but he could see Rachel had already made up her mind. "Fair? You want to talk about fair? Call me when you figure out what matters more." She left, and Daniel stood in his empty office, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life, or the best decision he'd ever make. Daniel didn't sleep much that night. He kept replaying the conversation with Rachel, wondering if he should have handled it differently. By morning, he'd checked his phone about 50 times, but there were no messages from her. Just silence, which somehow felt worse than anger. He texted Maria to make sure she was okay. Her response came back quickly. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to cause problems." "Maybe we should stop?" Daniel stared at that message for a long time before typing back, "Office at 9. We have work to do." When Maria arrived, she looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept either. They didn't talk about Rachel. Instead, they dove into code, losing themselves in the problems that had clear solutions, unlike the messy human complications that didn't. 3 days later, Rachel sent a single text. "I meant what I said. Choose." Daniel chose. He typed out a long message explaining why Maria's mentorship mattered, why he couldn't just abandon someone with real talent because it made others uncomfortable. But he deleted it and wrote something simpler instead. "I'm sorry. I hope you understand someday." Rachel never responded. Kevin noticed Daniel's mood at the office but didn't pry. What he did notice was Maria's work. She'd been given a complex feature to build, something that would normally take their senior developers a week. She finished it in 4 days with fewer bugs than anyone expected. "She's good," Kevin said to Daniel privately. "Like really good." "Where did you find her again?" "Library," Daniel said, which was technically true. That's where Maria had been coding before. "Well, whatever you're paying her, we should consider making this permanent. We're going to need more people when the investor money comes through." That was the other thing occupying Daniel's mind. The big investor pitch was 2 weeks away. Everything they'd been building for the past year came down to a 30-minute presentation and demo. The pressure was crushing, and then, exactly when they didn't need it, their mobile app broke. Not just a small bug, but a catastrophic failure. The database queries were timing out, the app was crashing on launch, and nobody could figure out why. It had been working perfectly the day before. The team pulled an emergency all-nighter. Daniel, Kevin, Chris, and 2 other developers huddled around computers, combing through code, checking logs, trying everything. By 3 in the morning, they were no closer to a solution. The demo was in 12 days, and they had a non-functional product. Maria had gone home at her regular time, not wanting to overstep her contractor role. But at 6 in the morning, Daniel's phone rang. "I think I know what's wrong," Maria said, skipping any greeting. "I couldn't sleep, kept thinking about the error logs you showed me. Can you check if anyone updated the database schema yesterday? Even something small?" Daniel pulled up the Git history. Sure enough, Chris had pushed a minor change to one of the tables late yesterday afternoon. "Yeah," Daniel said, "but it was just adding an index to improve performance." "The index is wrong," Maria said with certainty. "It's creating a lock on the table. Every query is waiting for every other query. Check the server logs, you'll see the wait times." Daniel checked. She was right. The solution took 10 minutes to implement once they knew what to look for. By 7 in the morning, the app was running again, smooth as ever. Kevin stood up from his computer and looked at Daniel. "How did she know that?" "Experience with slow systems," Daniel answered. "She's had to optimize code on terrible hardware. She sees bottlenecks other people miss." "Daniel," Kevin said seriously, "I want to offer her a full-time position. Proper salary, equity benefits. After the pitch, if we get the funding, she should be officially part of this team." Daniel felt a surge of pride for Maria, but also worry. There might be complications with her work authorization. "I don't know all the details. Then we'll figure it out. Good developers are worth the paperwork." When Daniel told Maria later that day, her reaction wasn't what he expected. She didn't smile or celebrate. Instead, she looked scared. "Full-time means they'll do background checks," she said quietly. "They'll want employment verification, education credentials. Daniel, I have nothing official. My degree isn't recognized here. I have a work permit, yes, but my resume is cleaning houses and a few months of contract work. What if they realize what? That you're incredibly talented? That you solved a critical problem our senior developers couldn't figure out? Maria, your work speaks for itself. In tech, maybe. But to HR departments? To lawyers? I'm a risk." She wasn't wrong, and Daniel knew it. The corporate world ran on credentials, on verified histories, on checkboxes that Maria couldn't tick. Her story was too complicated, too unconventional. On paper, she looked like exactly the kind of liability companies avoided. "Then we make you less of a risk," Daniel said. "Puente. We finish it, we launch it, and we make it successful. A real product with real users becomes part of your portfolio. Undeniable proof of what you can do." Over the next week, they worked on Puente every spare moment. Maria's vision for the app had grown since that first day Daniel found her at his computer. It wasn't just about navigating healthcare anymore. It helped immigrants with everything from understanding their rights to finding community resources to translating legal documents. They tested it with Maria's church community, a group of about 30 immigrant families. The feedback was overwhelming. People cried telling Maria how much easier the app made their lives. One woman said it helped her find a clinic that saved her son when he had an asthma attack. Another said the medication reminder feature meant his father never missed his heart pills anymore. Daniel helped Maria apply for a social innovation grant, a program that funded technology projects aimed at helping underserved communities. The application required a presentation, references, and a working prototype. Maria practiced her pitch over and over. Daniel would sit and listen, offering suggestions, helping her refine the story. She was nervous about public speaking in English, worried her accent would make people take her less seriously. "Your accent makes you authentic," Daniel told her. "These people want to fund projects that come from lived experience. You're not some tech bro trying to disrupt healthcare from your comfortable apartment. You built this because you needed it. That matters." The day of the grant presentation, Maria was terrified. She wore the same professional clothes from her first meeting with Kevin, her hands shaking slightly as she set up her laptop. But when she started talking, something shifted. She wasn't Maria, the nervous contractor, anymore. She was Maria, the developer, the problem solver, The person who saw a need and built a solution. She walked the judges through the app, showed them testimonials from real users, explained the technical decisions she'd made and why. One judge asked about her background. What made you qualified to build this? Maria paused, and Daniel, watching from the audience, held his breath. Then she answered with complete honesty. I wasn't qualified, she said. I was desperate. My mother needed help navigating the healthcare system, and I couldn't help her. Every form was confusing. Every phone call led to more questions. I thought, I know how to code. Maybe I can build something. So I did. I learned what I needed to learn. I talked to people who had the same struggles, and I built something that worked. If that makes me qualified, then yes. If not, well, the app works anyway. The room was quiet for a moment. Then one of the judges smiled. 2 weeks later, Maria got the email. She'd won the grant. $50,000 to develop Puente fully, to hire a designer, to market it properly to the communities that needed it. She called Daniel immediately, crying so hard she could barely speak. We did it. We actually did it. You did it, Daniel corrected. This was always your project. But there was more news that day. Daniel's startup had also succeeded. The investors had committed. $2 million in funding to grow the company, hire more people, expand the product. Kevin wanted Maria on the team officially. Whatever it takes, he said. We'll work with immigration lawyers if we need to. She's too valuable to lose. Everything was falling into place. Maria had cut back to just one cleaning client now, Daniel, and she insisted on keeping that one. So I remember, she said. So I never forget where I started. She was making more money than she'd ever imagined. Her mother's medical bills were covered. Sophia was thriving in school, even showing interest in coding herself. Maria had moved into a better apartment, one with space for a home office where she could work on Puente. But success brought new attention, and not all of it was welcome. A local tech blog picked up the story of Puente's grant award. They wanted to interview Maria, to write about the immigrant developer creating solutions for her community. Maria was hesitant but agreed. The article was published on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, Maria's phone wouldn't stop ringing. News outlets wanted to interview her. Immigration advocacy groups wanted to feature her story. Other developers wanted to contribute to Puente. And then came the call that changed everything. It was from someone Maria used to clean for, a woman named Patricia. She'd seen the article. She'd seen Maria's photo. You used my computer, Patricia said, her voice cold. 2 years ago, you cleaned my house every Monday, and you used my personal computer without permission. What else did you do? Did you steal from me? Access my accounts? Maria's blood ran cold. I only practiced coding. I never touched anyone's personal files. That's what you say. I'm calling a lawyer. I want to know exactly what you accessed. 3 more former clients called with similar accusations by the end of the day. The success story was turning into something ugly. People who'd never paid attention to their housekeeper suddenly remembered she'd been in their homes, near their computers, their private lives. Daniel found Maria sitting in her car outside the office, staring at her phone, looking smaller than he'd ever seen her. They think I'm a thief, she whispered. All those houses, all those people. They're going to ruin everything. Daniel got in the passenger seat. Did you ever actually access anyone's personal information? Never, I swear. I only used browsers in private mode, only worked on my own projects. But how do I prove that? How do I prove what I didn't do? That was the question that would define the next chapter of Maria's journey. Success had brought visibility, and visibility had brought scrutiny. The very thing that was supposed to validate her had put everything at risk. The accusations hit the local news by Thursday. Former housekeeper accessed clients' computers without permission, read one headline. The comments section was brutal. People called Maria a criminal, a con artist, worse. Someone started a thread on a neighborhood app warning others about her. Maria didn't leave her apartment for 2 days. She couldn't eat, could barely sleep. Sophia kept asking what was wrong. And Maria didn't know how to explain that the dream she'd been building was crumbling around her. Daniel showed up at her door Saturday morning with coffee and a plan. We're going to fix this, he said, stepping into her small living room. But I need you to trust me. How? Maria asked, her voice hollow. How do you fix people thinking you're a thief? With the truth. And with proof. Daniel had spent the last 2 days talking to lawyers, to digital forensics experts, to anyone who could help. He'd also reached out to every client Maria had ever worked for, not just the angry ones. "Most of your clients don't care," he told her. "The ones calling you out? They're the loud minority. I talked to Mrs. Chen, remember her? You cleaned her house for over a year. She said you were the most trustworthy person she'd ever hired. She's willing to testify to that." "Testify?" Maria looked panicked. "This is going to court?" "No, but we're going to get ahead of this. The forensics guy can check your devices, prove you never downloaded anyone's personal data. We document everything you did, show it was all legitimate learning and your own projects. We turn this from a scandal into a story about someone working incredibly hard to build a better life." Over the next week, they built Maria's defense. The forensics expert examined her laptop, her phone, her cloud storage. Everything. He found exactly what Maria had said. Her own code, her own projects, browser histories from library computers and Daniel's machine showing nothing but educational content and development work. "She's clean," the expert told Daniel. "There's no evidence of any unauthorized access to personal data. In fact, there's evidence she went out of her way to avoid it. Private browsing, separate user accounts, no save passwords. This woman was being more careful than most people are on their own computers." Daniel compiled everything into a detailed report. Then he did something unexpected. He called a press conference. "You're sure about this?" Kevin asked. "This could blow back on the company." "She's part of our company," Daniel said firmly. "If we don't stand by our people when things get hard, what kind of company are we?" The press conference was held at the startup office. Local reporters showed up, some curious, some clearly expecting drama. Maria sat next to Daniel, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Daniel spoke first. He told Maria's story, not the sensationalized version, but the real one. A talented computer science student forced to flee her country, a mother working multiple jobs while teaching herself to code at night, someone who used the only resources available to her to pursue her passion. Was it unconventional? Yes, Daniel said. Did she use computers without explicitly asking permission first? Yes, she did. But did she steal? Did she access private information? Did she harm anyone? The forensic evidence says absolutely not. What she did was learn. She practiced. She built tools to help her community. And when I discovered what she was doing, instead of seeing a criminal, I saw what she really was. A developer who refused to give up on her dreams despite impossible circumstances. Then Maria spoke. Her voice shook at first but grew steadier as she went on. "I know what I did was wrong," she said. "I should have asked permission. I was scared, and I was desperate, and I made a choice that I wish I had made differently. But I want everyone to know that I never, not once, looked at anyone's personal files. I never read anyone's emails or documents. I never accessed bank accounts or passwords. I was only trying to learn, to practice, to become who I knew I could be." She paused, looking directly at the cameras. "To the people whose homes I cleaned, whose trust I may have broken, I am deeply sorry. I should have asked. But I also want you to know that the person you trusted in your home was the same person sitting here now. I never betrayed that trust with your personal information, and I never would." One reporter raised her hand. "Do you think you would be where you are now if you hadn't used those computers?" Maria thought about that. Honestly? Maybe not. The library computers were too slow, too limited. But that doesn't make it right. It just makes me human. Someone who made a hard choice because I saw no other way forward. After the press conference, the narrative started to shift. Not everywhere and not with everyone, but enough. A tech podcast invited Maria on to talk about barriers immigrants face in the industry. A coding boot camp asked her to speak to their students about perseverance. The original accusers mostly went quiet when the forensic report showed there was nothing to prosecute. But the real turning point came from an unexpected source. Patricia, the woman who'd started the accusations, called Maria directly. "I saw your press conference," she said, "and I need to apologize. I was angry because I felt violated, but I realize now I was more angry at myself. I never really saw you when you worked for me. You were just the cleaning lady. I never asked about your life, your dreams, anything. And that's on me." Maria didn't know what to say to that. "You didn't owe me your story," Patricia continued, "but I owed you basic human respect and I didn't give it. I'm sorry, it wasn't a complete resolution. Some people still thought what Maria did was wrong, and maybe they weren't entirely incorrect. But the conversation had changed from criminal immigrant to something more nuanced, more human. Daniel's startup continued to grow. With the new funding, they hired 4 more developers. Maria became a team lead, mentoring junior developers the same way Daniel had mentored her. She was good at it, patient and understanding, especially with people from unconventional backgrounds. Puente launched officially 6 months after the grant award. The first week it had 5,000 downloads. By the end of the first month, 50,000. Immigrant communities across the country were using it, reviewing it, recommending it to others. Maria started getting invitations to speak at conferences about accessible healthcare technology. Her mother's health stabilized with consistent care and medication. Sophia, now 12, had started learning Python, following in her mother's footsteps. She'd sit next to Maria in the evenings, working through coding tutorials while Maria worked on Puente updates. "Mom," Sophia said one night, "why did you keep trying? When everything was hard, why didn't you just give up?" Maria thought about that question. Because giving up would have meant accepting that circumstances define you, that where you start determines where you end up, and I couldn't accept that. I knew who I was inside even when the world didn't see it. I just had to keep working until the world caught up. A year after that first discovery in Daniel's office, Maria made a decision. She still had one cleaning client, Daniel. She'd kept that job even as everything else changed. Showing up once a month to clean his office, refusing payment. "It keeps me grounded," she'd say when he protested. But on this particular Tuesday, she arrived with a different plan. She brought her cleaning supplies, but also her laptop. She cleaned his office like always. But when she finished, she sat down at his computer. Just like that first day, Daniel found her there coding away, and he had to smile at the parallel. "Working on something new?" he asked. "Sort of," Maria said. "I'm creating a mentorship platform for people like me, immigrants, career changers, self-taught developers, anyone who doesn't fit the traditional path. A place where they can find mentors, share resources, learn from each other. That's a great idea. I'm calling it Puente Dos," Maria said. "Bridge 2. Because one bridge wasn't enough. We need more ways for people to cross from where they are to where they want to be." Daniel sat down next to her. "Need any help?" "Actually, yes. I need someone who understands what it's like to take a chance on someone unconventional. Someone who sees potential where others see risk." "I might know someone like that," Daniel said with a smile. They worked together for the next few hours, building the foundation of something new. At one point, Maria paused and looked around the office. "You know what's funny?" she said. "A year ago, I was terrified you'd find me here. I thought my life was over when you walked through that door. Turns out it was just beginning." "Life's weird like that," Daniel agreed. "The moments that feel like endings are sometimes actually starts." Maria went back to her code, her fingers moving across the keyboard with the same confident rhythm Daniel had first heard through his office door. But this time, she wasn't stealing moments or hiding her work. She was building in the open, creating something that would help others find their own bridges. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the desk. Maria's cleaning supplies sat in the corner, a reminder of where she'd been. Her laptop sat open, showing where she was going. And somewhere in between those two things was the truth of who she'd always been, someone who refused to let circumstances write the ending to her story. Daniel's phone buzzed with a message from Kevin. "Board meeting next week. They want to talk about making Maria a partner. Thoughts?" Daniel looked at Maria, completely absorbed in her code, solving problems, building solutions, being exactly who she was meant to be. He typed back, "About time." Some stories don't have neat endings. They just keep going, building on themselves, creating new chapters. Maria's story was like that. The lines of code that had left Daniel speechless that first day were just the beginning. Every day she wrote new lines, built new bridges, proved that talent and determination don't care about credentials or circumstances. And somewhere in the city, there was probably someone else like Maria, cleaning houses or driving for rideshare or working retail, but coding in the margins, teaching themselves, refusing to give up. Maybe they'd find Puente Dos someday. Maybe they'd find their own Daniel, someone willing to ask, "What are you working on?" instead of just, "Why are you here?" Or maybe they'd find something else entirely, some other unexpected path that hadn't been written yet. Because that's the thing about determination. It doesn't need permission to exist. It just needs an opportunity, however small, to grow into something the world can't ignore. Maria saved her work, closed her laptop, and smiled. Tomorrow she'd come back not to clean but to build, and that made all the difference.